What many of you might not know is that psychotic episodes have 3 parts to them, not just one. They are the prodromal phase, the acute phase, and the residual phase. The residual phase is the natural conclusion, and the acute phase is when psychosis is at its worst. But today I want to talk about the first part, the prodromal phase, and what that's like for me. The early days of my psychotic break started off harmless, but they were extremely harmful in the end. So today, let's take a few moments to talk about my psychotic prodrome and what that's meant for me. If that sounds good to you, then sit back, grab a beverage, and let's get into it. And if you are new here, my name is Kit, and I'm diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder, which is a condition where someone experiences symptoms of schizophrenia, such as delusions and hallucinations, but also symptoms of a mood disorder, either major depression or, in my case, bipolar. My psychotic break officially happened in the latter half of 2018, but I mainly refer to that time frame as when it happened because that's when my symptoms were at their worst, when I was in my acute phase. My prodromal phase actually lasted a year to maybe a year and a half, and started all the way back in what I can guess was the beginning of 2017. But I do have stronger memories of it definitely kicking off in the summer of 2017. So that's where this story begins. So in the summer of 2017, I was hypomanic to the point where I visited 5.5 countries in 3 months. I say half countries because at one point I just had a beer in Germany in a train station, so that's a half country. And I went to Jamaica and the Philippines and several countries in Europe. All the while, I had a new interest in religion, a newfound love of God, specifically the Christian God. I'd been somewhat agnostic up until that point, or loosely believing in God, and I can't think of a particular thing that kicked off this interest in God. Like many things with my illness, it kinda just happened, and I went all in. I prayed constantly, kept up a constant dialogue, never said amen, and sometimes God talked back. And he told me those I knew were going to pass away, and I couldn't do anything to stop it. People that weren't particularly close to me, but still people I knew nonetheless. At this point, I thought I had spiritual gifts, a kind of biblical wisdom that made it all make sense. Because if I had Bible verses to back it up, it had to be real, right? I was taught the Bible's words were all true, that they were the word of God and were to be taken seriously. So I took these premonitions that were part of my gifts and I kept them close. And it's important to note here that those of you that know my story, the God wasn't mean yet. Meaning that even though he told me these things, he was still kind. And it's hard to explain how I knew this, but I got feelings of kindness and comfort from the other side. After a particularly insightful sermon about wisdom, and how God can and will teach you how to use it, I went ahead and asked God personally to teach me how to use these gifts, and he agreed. Naturally, I was overjoyed because the very creator of the universe wanted to help little old me. Oh, my life was turning around. At this point, I should have gotten help, but I was so caught up in the delusions and the hallucinations that I didn't think anything was wrong. Sure, I thought I knew people would pass away, but I'll be honest, that had been happening on and off for years, which again should have been a red flag. So I didn't think too much of this with my recent premonitions because this was kind of normal for me. And looking back, these beliefs coincided when my religious delusions flared. But because it had happened before, I didn't think too much of it, even though the people that were going to pass away were getting closer and closer and closer to me over time. But I'll get to that. And you might be asking, did any of it ever actually happen? Yes, actually, some of them did. But those who did were like very sick cancer patients. So it wasn't too much of a stretch to have it actually happen given how sick they were. There will be someone out there who hears this part of the video and tries to convince me that it was actually real and that it's actually a gift and that it wasn't all in my head. But it's not. I can assure you it is not real. And telling me it is actually harmful. So no, it's not real, and don't argue with me that it is. I won't read your comments. But to go further on explaining how this actually worked, let me give an example. If I said I was able to predict the weather and said it would rain every day, sometimes I would be right. So it was like that. I would get a bunch of premonitions. Sometimes they would happen. I would focus on the happenings being, oh my goodness, I was right. And then the delusions would have me thinking that I was some prophet. But I'm not a prophet. And I was wrong every time except for a few people. And I got these premonitions a lot during my prodrome. It's important to note here that the delusional aspect had me believing them fully, even if most of them didn't come true. So I just kept going with it, thinking I had some special power, even though I was very clearly wrong most of the time. I truly believed I had a gift, even if said gift wasn't reliable in the slightest. Because that's the thing about delusions, is that you believe them. God started talking back more and more over time. Like, really talking back. And said awful things that I believed. No, I was diving deep into the Bible. Searching and searching for answers and seemingly finding them. Mainly in the Old Testament, which is what my God seemed to be aligning with. Because he was becoming more ruthless and unforgiving the more time passed. And I started feeling like I had no choice but to believe him. And how could I deny his existence when I had what I felt was undeniable proof that he was real? Once again, I didn't know I was psychotic. I had absolutely no idea. So all of this was very, very real to me. I remember being in the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, attending Mass because I felt called to do so. And quick funny story, I did a no-no. I'm not Catholic, but I took communion in Notre Dame. And I do respect the Catholic Church. Like, oh my goodness, is it a force to be reckoned with? I formally apologize to every Catholic who watches this video because honestly, I didn't know I made a mistake and I didn't learn that until I went up there, and boy oh boy did I feel horrible when it happened. So oops. Yeah, oops. But anyways, that service was a turning point. And super cool because it was in a legendary, iconic cathedral. It was my welcome back to Christianity. A day when I dedicated myself back to my God and dedicated my life to him again. It was a traditional spiritual experience. And in those pews, he actually told me the day somebody would go. Did they? Nope. Did I pay much attention to this? Nope. I was deep in it by this point. And so I continued to travel, visiting the Philippines at the very end. And I had a mixed mood episode and went on Abilify. Abilify is an antipsychotic that did absolutely nothing for my psychosis, which I find hilarious. I was this close. And then I went through my senior year of college with all these delusions and all these hallucinations hot on my heels. It was an interesting time, to say the least. My slow descent into madness. Because the thing is, these things, my psychosis, it never went away, it just got worse. I went to church a lot, and just kept praying all the time. I kept feeling God on the other side in everything I did. And over time, he became more and more mean, more and more harsh, more and more unforgiving. And to my later horror, more and more present, stronger, and more terrifying. And it's important to note here through all of this, and this should have been the tip-off that it wasn't actually the Christian God, Jesus never played a role. I almost entirely read and interpreted the Old Testament because that's what my God seemed to be encouraging me to do. The God didn't mention Jesus or anything. So I didn't do anything with Christ at all. I remember one day trying to get baptized because I wanted to be. I thought that was the logical next step. So I went to go do a little interview they do with you before, well, the dunking. And they asked me to tell them the story about how I got saved by Jesus. And to my surprise, I had no words. I had a firm and unwavering belief in God and went to church. And I believed I had the Christian God in my literal head. I believed he was speaking directly to me. And so as a result of those things, I was a Christian according to what the God in my head was having me believe. But when I was asked, no words came out because Jesus just wasn't a part of it for me. Because I was like, yes, of course I'm saved. Why wouldn't I be? God was talking to me and helping me. But no, I didn't have anything to say about Jesus. And that really should have been another red flag that things weren't quite right with me. But I didn't catch it, and no one caught it for me. And so that was my life. I went through it with prayers and verses and services and singing, all the while being encouraged by some people that everything I was going through was true. Because, according to the Bible, gifts like mine can happen. And plenty of Christians actually encourage this kind of thing. And that's a dangerous, dangerous thing to someone who is psychotic. But the more time went on, the more and more I pulled away from those around me, the church included. I spent more and more time engaging in religion privately than I did with real people, obsessing over what I thought were my special powers, really obsessing over them. I have 3 journals documenting what I believed. And I might share some of what's within those pages someday because it is wild stuff. I was so into it. Because why wouldn't I be? My psychosis had me believing I was special, with a God who confirmed it and kept talking to me. It was a perfect storm, a recipe for true disaster. And in the latter half of 2018, the God I worshipped became mean and cruel and told me that those closest to me weren't gonna be here anymore. Not people on the fringe, those closest to me. People I very much loved with all my heart. And he still became more mean and more cruel and more unforgiving than before. The kind God that I had no problem giving my life to was one that I felt I was stuck with, unable to escape from. I was caught in the throes of an angry God who I couldn't make happy. And it got worse and worse, eventually transitioning into the acute phase of psychosis that ruined my entire life. So, that's my prodromal phase and what it's like. It wasn't quick. It developed over the course of a year to a year and a half and happened gradually. And because of its gradual nature and my tendency to pull away from those around me the more intense it got, no one actually caught it. So it got worse and I truly lost my mind. And that's my story. YouTube really seems to think that you'd like this video, so go check that video out if you want more content from me. But other than that, thanks so much for joining me and making the uncomfortable comfortable. Subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next one.